I'm going to
Yeah.
ask you, what is your evolution of race consciousness?
Yeah, I'm so glad that you gave me this before I came on and that I had watched enough shows so that I could be kind of concise. I thought for sure of like four distinct instances. So when I entered kindergarten, I'd say probably when I was 6, my first encounter with the idea of race. I had done a test and filled in the little bubbles, and I got like the worst grade. I got basically an F. And but I got all the answers right. And so when my mom inquired about why I got that grade, the teacher said because she's too dark. And so, like, what I got from that, though, I was way too young to like piece together anything. So, really, I just felt like that was a thing that, people thought that was wrong. And I got the sense of, some people don't like other people's look from that, but, and that maybe that Black was a thing and that was considered maybe bad. But I didn't get that that was about me in any real way, and I didn't get the broader sense of people. So then next for me, when I was, kind of 8-ish, when I got the sense more of a people, I I remember distinctly trying to separate myself from what I saw as Blackness. So I began to view myself as an exception. And what I began to learn of a people began to take shape. And I decided that that wasn't who I was. I stopped eating chicken. I thought I was, I planned to go to college. I thought that I was going to be a whole bunch of things that defied stereotypes. So that was real distinct for me. And then in high school, I learned the word caste, and I kind of saw how racism functions, what I would consider like the architecture or the logistics of racism. That I call it a self-eating monster that it basically continues to feed itself. And I saw that in real life, that this wasn't sort of this one-off um, idea that some people have, but I experienced as more casual, more integrated into society. But I still felt myself as an exception. So the real like moment came a lot more recently when I felt more racialized myself, which was when I was 29. And with the father of my child, we had an interaction with like, he was in trouble with the law, and we had an interaction that he was being dismissed by someone. And I thought, oh, well, I'll go up there. I'm very well spoken. People like me, I'll fix this. And the lady really was like, even less, she did the neck rolling at me, and she was like, no, you're not coming over here to fix it. And it escalated from there to her like slamming me against the wall with my very pregnant belly. And and then me calling the police, because that's who I am. And I grew up thinking I was an exception and I could call the police, and the police coming and really not being on my side, threatening to that they could throw me in jail, and taking away the opportunity. My daughter's dad was there for a class, and so taking away the opportunity for him to actually be able to do that class. And I realized for the very first time that it wasn't just about feelings, that racism has real impact, even in the hands of just individuals who believe in this ideology for whatever reason. And that was the first time it was like real and evident to me. So I feel bad coming to it so late in life. But it has definitely been something that I've talked about more as a result, because of all that time thinking that I was an exception and just finally seeing the lie. And so now it's like my duty to just take it everywhere that I can and try to really also, shed light, because I don't think I was a terrible person or evil in any way. I was just wrong. I had the wrong idea about who I was, and what Blackness meant, and what race meant. And I, just want to talk to people and help them understand things better if I can.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for that answer. Me too. And, you know, I just think that there's an important point to make, first of all, which is that nobody should be ashamed of having a misconception about race, because it's literally designed to make sure that we don't learn about it, that we don't understand it, that we don't know the kind of architecture of race, or racism that you mentioned earlier. They want to make sure
Yeah.
that we don't that we don't know. And so, of course, like, how can we understand that? There's very few ways to to come to understand such a thing, and especially in an environment where most people, drink the Kool-Aid, right? Or most people have, like, are would like to believe that race isn't a problem anymore, that we're past all that, that it's all in the past and this and that, and or that we're the exception, right? Sometimes as Black people, like, oh, like, I have my little 3 degrees and I'm a college professor. Blah, 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 blah. Like, listen, I, I'll be honest. I cannot relate to feeling like I am the exception, and maybe I want you to give me some insight into this, because for me, and I've talked about this on the show before, like, everyone was always trying to tell me since I was a child that I was an exception. Everybody
Mm.
was trying to tell me, like, you're so smart, like, whatever, like, you're amazing at music, you're this and that, blah, blah, blah. And, oh, you're not like the other kids, And none of that was correct. I knew that back then. I knew when I was a child, when I was like a little 5-year old, 6-year old, I was like, I heard them, but I knew, like,
Right.
I knew that wasn't right. And part of it is because of my mom, because she always taught me that you're no better than nobody else, and nobody else is better than you. You gotta
Yeah.
remember that, right? And so that stuck with me. And plus the golden rule, it made so much sense.
Yeah. I mean, I think the primary thing is a safe space. I think that we don't have enough safe space for deconstructing some of our ideas. I know that even I remember long before that, while I was in college, having dated someone who really had a much higher consciousness than I did at that point, and being offended by it, because it seemed like an affront to who I am, and who I was up to that point. It seemed it was too disruptive to the ideology I had about myself. And so it wasn't, yeah, it was really kind of the most aggressive I think I've ever been, and not knowing anybody anymore. Like, I don't even care to talk to this person anymore. And that's generally not the way I function, but it was so upsetting to me. Um, yeah. And so it didn't feel safe. And I think a lot of times the notion of racism is so overburdened with the notion of being evil and malicious, and people can't, there's not a lot of room for people to think differently, to pull themselves out of that space and say, oh, what haven't I considered? To think about what I'm thinking about, and what foundational beliefs are making me believe this is true, and why do I double down on it? Why am I so defensive of this position? So yeah, I think a safe space is really the key.
Yeah, I agree. And, you know, there are public opponents of creating that space. Like, it's not as if, it's just open for anyone to do. I want to make that very clear for people. Like,
Yeah.
If my state of North Carolina could shut down any option to do that, they absolutely would legislate that. In fact,
Yeah.
I could literally like see it happen. So, yeah, this is like a real battle, you
Yeah.
know. It's an internal battle, as we've kind of talked about so far. You know, everyone has an evolution of race consciousness. You're not born, you know, you're not born with the knowledge of a racial hierarchy and that you fall this place on it. You literally learn it with your body and your experience and your
Yeah.
life. So it becomes tied up in your identity. It becomes tied up in some of your most foundational and precious memories sometimes, or your worst.
Mm.
Um, and then you walk with that, you know, and then you walk forward with that.
Yeah.
And there's many branches from there, you know? So I appreciate you for coming on and kind of explaining your story, because hopefully it'll give people a better understanding of what it's like to kind of have these moments where you're like, that wasn't quite right. You know, that kind of
Yeah.
hurt. I don't even know like why it hurt, but like it kind of did, you know, like,
Yeah.
now you said that it was easy for you because you felt that you were part of the thing to shed it, which makes sense. But I do want to point out that part of your kind of exceptioning of yourself that you did seem to be related to superiority. And
Hmm.
so
For sure.
so it's interesting that you were able to easily shed the idea of superiority because you experienced someone treating you as if that wasn't the case, and then kind of like connected some dots, right? Like,
Yeah.
so like,
Yeah.
do you feel like you were jump started in that moment? And like, if you do, like, can you like recall by any chance like what dots were connected for you, like specifically, like did because I know for me, real quick, while you
Mm.
ruminate on that, you know, coming out as a gay man, that was
Mm.
like a moment in time. Like I didn't know I was a homosexual man. You know, I
Right.
had to sit down and like it was like pieces of a puzzle coming together. Moments in my life that suddenly were all connected as one. And this is the only
Mm.
explanation that connected all of these things that I had kind of put aside, like you said, created a mental barrier for myself for various
Yeah.
reasons, that was then shattered in that moment. And
Yeah.
it was like a flood of all of this stuff. And I knew right away, you know, like instantly. Um, and I wonder for you, was it like that? Like, did you have like a mind barrier shattering experience? And if so, did you remember any experiences, or do you recall any thoughts that you might have had?
Yeah, I mean that moment when I was 29 and I experienced that thing with the lady slamming me against the wall. I mean, honestly, it was earth-shattering. And everything that happened after that with the police and the opportunity for my daughter's dad to finish the class, all revealed different parts of things. So primarily, I had mostly been taught, again, by white men, that the difference was the victimhood. Um, and that, it was really just my responsibility to be as near to whiteness as I could manage. And that set me apart. So that um, I viewed talk about racism and race as like really wallowing. And I especially viewed it as inconsequential, that people were complaining about a thing that just hurt their feelings. And I'm not, much of a feelings person. So to me, it was just ridiculous all the way around. But in that moment, I saw a lot of real consequence. My physical body was harmed. Um, Financially, we were threatened. Like I felt like if we hadn't have been in our financial situation, we couldn't have worked our way around that. It would have been really devastating to us if we were in a different financial situation. And in that moment, I did really understand that it wasn't just like complaining. And it wasn't fake, that it was very, very real, and it fell differently on different people. So where, I had experienced racism, obviously, but I existed in a way, and had opportunities that kept me from having to feel the penalty of other people's racism. So, if somebody didn't want to play with me or something like that, it was all small stuff. But that moment was very big, and I saw how it could be bigger for someone who wasn't me. And it changed everything.
It's interesting you describe it that way, because like you're describing not just thinking about it for yourself, but thinking about it for others. So you already had that in you, like in terms of like thinking about others, and like not just kind of focusing on your own individual life experience, but, thinking beyond the scope of that. Right. A lot of people don't do that. And so I wonder if an experience like that would even trigger the same response, And there's all these little nuances in the way that people experience life and think about life, that part of what I do with these conversations is just collect these stories so I can learn more and more and more about that, and hopefully, come up with some kind of alchemical formula to get people to experience this in hopefully a way that isn't as painful as a lot of people do experience, because I don't think it necessarily has to be as painful as a lot of people experience, in an environment where you basically criminalize talking about this subject matter, and food. Okay. Food. All right. When you share food with people, I feel like shared humanity becomes a thing that naturally is kind of output from that experience. And so I'm definitely going to have food at all of my events. I had an event in a barbershop. Black Barber, Kendra's Cave, check them out, Durham, North Carolina. And he opened the shop up for us to have a little recording of the Contraband Wagon. And I was going to have a conversation with him about race, and I did. In front of a live audience, just people from the community, people who were part of my meetup group who I invited. Random people. I put flyers up around the community. I talked to people in different businesses and around the way, and we did it. And I hired a black catering company. They best catering company, voted best catering. Thank you. Wow, best catering company in Chapel Hill. And we brought them in. They made amazing food. And we had melanated wine, black-owned winery. LaShonda Modis, you can check her out. Check out her wines. She was on the show, and you can check out her recording on YouTube. So we did this event, right? We had this conversation, and we have wine, we have food, and we had conversation. And one of the best things that came out of that conversation is when I was done, I spoke to the catering company owner, Jamel, and he was like, I was listening to every word of that conversation. I was surprised because we were all the way in the back of the barbershop. He was all the way in the front of the barbershop with the food. He was like, I heard every word. He was like, it was like I was listening to myself tell my own story. And that is what I'm after, because that is what builds that common humanity, right? When people hear someone else and it's like you could be the one saying it, that is what brings people to understand, okay, we are both the same. I think those moments can be created, they can be pretty easily, I think, manifested. We just don't consciously do it. We don't intentionally do it. No one's really doing that, like, for the most part. And so my goal is to fill that gap there and to cause some good trouble.
I think that music is another one, like, and for people who dance, because I think that when we especially I think that Black people are eclectic, and that, you know, we don't think of the culture, American culture, as being so infused with Blackness, but it really is. And Black people have, you know, they have to live in the same America, and hear the same hit songs and the same, you know, and so many of the things. And so when we start like, I heard a great DJ set one time in Vegas, and it was basically like mashup of hip hop and classic rock and R&B, and it was so unifying. And you know, it was a party, so there wasn't, you know, conversation, but I did notice the people in the room looking at other people in the room like, oh, this song too. Like, oh, this is our jam, together, high-fiving each other. And I think that yeah, music especially has a power to bring folks together, and there's a lot that we have in common. And getting to that, food, you know, eating, music, moving our bodies, like, especially because, you know, like, we don't all dance the same. And you know, there's a range from, you know, not very good at it to very good at it, and we all fit somewhere in there. So, you know, no matter who you are, you're not necessarily up toward the top just because of, you know, what your skin looks like. And so I think those are good ways for people to come together too. Just,
I mean, have you always been a good like communicator, or do you feel like, I mean, because you had your thoughts on this subject, right? That you know were incorrect, and then you like came to understand more. Now you're communicating so fluidly about it on social media. Was there some kind of transition period? Did you do some kind of particular education for yourself?
I didn't. I wish I had. You know, I think I'm a lot less well read than a lot of my peers, but a lot of this really, in being a logical person, it just makes sense to me. That when you look at the environment around us and you see how things work to kind of muddy what we're looking at, and all those underlying assumptions, when you start getting rid of them, what begins to happen to your conclusions? So that's really what happened for me. Like, I kind of already saw it, but then kind of putting myself in the center of it made it much more clear. And I think, you know, as a marketer, I think a lot about, you know, what the message is that gets to people most. So where I find myself being hopeful is that a lot of people are waking up to the idea that they've been lied to in numerous ways, about how things work, and who's behind things, and you know, things that they thought were good, they're thinking are less good. And you know, I think there's a big scary contingent of people who, you know, are just fighting against the notion that they don't want things to change, or they want things to be a certain way for their comfort, but they're also experiencing that a lot of things that they thought aren't. And I think that there's some room there to say that there are plenty of things like that, and this is one of them. That this structure that we've built around who is what based on something superficial is a lie. And there are numerous lies. And the only real freedom and the only real way to better things is to demolish those lies, to stop believing those lies. And so, you know, that doesn't have any consequence for those folks who are still tied to that lie, because you're in a much better space, just like everything else they believe, whether it's true or not. They're in a much better space to think things through, and be mindful and be careful, and make better decisions when they aren't believing some foundational lies. So I do feel a little bit of hope around people questioning things more.
Yeah, that's where hope lies. And yeah, and don't underestimate us. All right,
Yeah.
like I know that we have dropped the ball, so to speak.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways, but ultimately, once we put ourselves in the center of it, as you put earlier, you're exactly right. Like, we are very egocentric, an egocentric people. So I think more people need to find themselves in the center of it. Hopefully, I can just simulate that, right? Like, that's kind of the
Right.
goal, is to simulate that, putting themselves in the middle of it. Step into the chair. We do have a question here from Marigoth, my moderator. He says, "Is blackness the only reason she feels part of the thing, or something else in there?" I think you kind of already answered this, but feel free to field an answer here.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I feel like it's probably a very it's a controversial position actually that I didn't know if we were going to get to. But I've definitely taken plenty of heat from Black people about the parts of culture that really exist for us all. And of course, everybody doesn't have to be in it for it to be our culture. But I grew up in a very different way. And if I were like from a data standpoint, if I were drawing lines about who we are and how we group, I would draw those lines more geographically, more I'm a lot of things. I'm a mom. I'm someone who went to a certain college. I'm someone from San Diego. I'm someone from a certain part of San Diego. Like what I feel, people talk about being tribal, but what I feel like how I feel I would define my tribe has little to do with my race. And but I do feel like the shared experience of racism and discrimination binds us in a way. We have some shared experience in that manner, how we exist in the world and how the world views us is a important part of our perspective, but it's not the whole of mine. And even from music and food and the way that I experienced Black culture was different growing up in San Diego, and growing up, the child of my parents who also experienced it different, growing up in LA and San Diego. And my grandparents, removed from Mississippi and not bringing everything with them. So, what I view in terms of culture, yeah, I think there are other ties that bind us. And I feel like culture is kind of just loose terminology to try to bind us all together into something that is not Blackness. And try to make it like there's something more fundamental and real about the discrimination we experience. That there's a more meaty reason, and there isn't. So I think that's kind of a controversial perspective, but I really do believe that I'm a lot of things, and so my in on that particular thing is very much my skin color and the racism and discrimination I've experienced, and then within the community there's colorism and other things. I think the thing that is most intriguing to me is how people arrive at their conclusions. I think we're all differently capable. So I fundamentally believe that people are smart and that we're mostly trying to do good. There are definitely some people who are committed to doing bad, but for the most part, even some of the worst actions are under the idea that some good will come from it, that they're getting rid of something bad so that they can have more good. So yeah, I try to explore how people are getting to their endpoint, arriving at their conclusions. The conversations I'm having online are as much about, you know, being able to feeling like I'm capable of helping explain things, because I feel like that's something that I'm sort of good at sometimes. Um, and but also, you know, learning how people reach their conclusions so that I can be better at explaining things. Because if I understand how they got there, then the next time I encounter someone who might have followed a similar path, I can maybe disrupt it in a different way. I can say, "Have you ever thought about this?" And you know, have them less set and, you know, less set in their way, and come out from some of those assumptions or some of those things that we take for granted for a moment, so that they can consider how they might have it wrong. And I don't expect that to happen like in the conversation. I think that's the funny thing I experience all the time, where people are like, "No, if you haven't convinced me, you didn't say anything." But like, you heard me. You're gonna go away with this, and you're gonna
It's
think
right
about it.
in
Maybe it'll come
there.
up when somebody else brings it up. Yeah. And so eventually, maybe you'll get there like I did. You know, maybe one day all the things will fire and the dots will connect, and you'll be there. But it's not my job to get anybody there. And I just want to, you know, contribute to their journey.
Very good perspective. The very first guest who ever came on the Contraband Wagon, Solomon Gibson, he's a local actor here in the state of North Carolina, and he used to call it planting seeds. He's like, "That's what I do. I plant seeds, you know, whether they germinate and grow, you know, whether, you know, what happens after that, that's up to them, you know, but like, that is the purpose that I've chosen, you know, to serve, you know," and it sounds like you have to a certain extent as well, and me too. So, listen, that's three. And we don't need too many more, you know. There don't have to be that many of us. We just gotta, you know, we can reverse the course that the United States has kind of put us on. I think fairly easily, actually. Um,
Yeah.
the question is, and this is always the question: is there the will to do so? Is there the will to do so? Like, will people decide to do it? It's still up in the air, you know. Like, I mean, I've made my personal individual decision, but we definitely need a critical mass. And I don't know. I'm looking around. I'm hopeful from what I see. I see people like yourself, you know, and like I said, that's why I brought you on. Educating people, you know, communicating with people, being respectful but firm, giving people the facts, you know, laying out the reality for people, so and making sure they can't run from it. I love that, you know, and we need more of that. We need a critical mass of that that can counteract all of the legal prohibitions on teaching and talking about race within the school system, the lack of a social environment where you can have these conversations. You know, we got to create it ourselves. We got to do it for ourselves, and that's always been historically quite difficult to get a lot of people to decide to do something for themselves together. But I don't know. I think we have a chance. You know, we have a chance to do it without as much death and destruction as it typically takes. You know,
Right.
and we've already had quite a lot of that. So, yeah, that's my hope, is to just deal with the collateral damage, you know, and just try to lessen the damage, because change is messy, change is hard, change causes damage.
Oh, I said I appreciate it. I definitely think that's really important work, and it's definitely um, helpful for to have someone who's thought about some things in ways that I haven't. Or all the people. I mean, I encounter people all the time who thought about a bunch of things in ways that I haven't, and are trying to facilitate conversations and think about how. And how remains like the biggest question for me. You know, in the individual conversations, I feel like they're not hitting the same. So it yeah, I'm constantly interested in what's next. Yeah, I think there's a political thing that I'm passionate about as well. I think that ranked choice voting and open primaries are important. I think that um, like disentangling politics and race, um, and really getting down to specific issues is an important way to kind of dismantle what we're experiencing. Because I think that the notion that people are all trying to preserve a certain way that of life, or that people are trying to take us light years in the future, that's not where the majority of us live. That's not where the majority of this exists. And so that if we were decoupling political parties from good ideas and bad ideas, that we'll see more power. And that a large amount of people, even though everybody's not convinced of the shared humanity, they do realize when things are harmful, when working so hard to keep people from having opportunities is actually counterproductive for everyone. And I think that people would vote in line with what they think is right, even if they aren't convinced of our shared humanity.
I don't know about all that. People people are like literally on their deathbed dying from COVID, still denying that it exists. So like I don't know. Like, I just said you were underestimating humanity before, but maybe maybe it's me. but, but yeah, no, I hear you. Like I just think that like you said earlier, this stuff goes so deep. It's like tendrils in people's like literal thought patterns. Like it's very difficult to predict, right? What's going to happen with it. It really depends on every individual and what every individual does. It's kind of weird, like
Yeah.
there's. So I try not to get too big for my britches, and just like stick to what I know, which is much of what you've been talking about, the mechanisms of how this stuff operates, just using that knowledge to try to give people that opportunity. And then
Yeah.
the rest is up to them. When I was first starting this show, I was reaching out to my contacts, different people who I encountered. And one of them was a law school colleague. And he I was telling him, hey, don't you remember that time when I was like, trying to talk to you and the other guys about race and this and that? And I asked him this question after we've been talking a little bit about the show, and we've been talking about, our lives and whatnot. And he just had this look of sadness,
Mm.
you know? And what it looked like to me is that he was reflecting on our time together in law school. And I know that I was looked down upon, and I know that he was like realizing that. I've had this moment with many different people who I encountered during law school, actually, where they like, I can watch them have a realization that they realize that they look down on me unfairly. It's very, very weird to be able to see that so many different times. But yeah, I've observed it. And in this instance, that's what I saw in his sadness. And
Yeah.
he literally cried. And he told a story about how the first time he really ever had a deep intellectual conversation about like race and gender and sexuality and stuff like this, he was in his early 20s, and that was his first conversation ever. And he talked about it like he was happy that he had it. He was like, it was an amazing conversation, but he was also sad that that was the first one that he had ever had like that. And we had all this amazing conversation, and I tried to get him to come on the show. He has aspirations of being a judge. He might already be a judge. I don't know. I haven't looked him up,
Yeah.
but he decided. He was like, "Oh, let me get back to you." The "let me get back to you" crowd. There's a lot of people in it. He was one of them, but it's hard to watch people make that choice, to step away, to be like, thanks for letting me cry it out, but I'm gonna just go ahead and back where I was, where it was warm, where I felt safe, where I felt comfortable, uh, you know, where I can maintain my privilege and my power and become a judge.
Yeah.
So, um, I think getting people to give up their power, to give up their privileges, that's one of the biggest barriers in this equation as well. Um, but for you, seemed like it was pretty easy again.
Yeah. I mean, I think I don't I think people also feel special. Um, I think that supremacy is set up in such a way that when you have like a gold star somewhere, that you that it makes you feel better. Not necessarily even better than other people, but just better in the world, better about yourself. I think that's a challenging thing to give up. And if you have to begin to think about these things in new ways, about a shared humanity, about who you've been. I mean, in that moment when I hit the wall, when the lady threw me up against the wall, I realized what an asshole I have been. My God. To people who, yeah, I mean, most of the people aren't even my complexion. So, even in the grand scheme of things, like beyond colorism and the whole thing, I was just, acting like people were beneath me for so long for no reason. And I think that's hard. That, I mean,
So why
it's
would
hard for me still. I mean, that
it
my
okay? So that's what
way
I
to
want to
fight
know. So
against it.
it is hard for you. It's still hard for you, huh?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like the idea of it brings tears to my eyes. Like the only thing that I could think to do was to just never be that way again, and to challenge everything. I mean, even, where we're having conversations about other people and, things not related to race, where, my mind could be stuck. I'm a person of faith. I grew up in, a religious tradition, that no, just that I'm not willing to ever be that again. And so I challenge it in every way that I can. But that's because it hurt. It hurt really bad to realize that I had been unfair and unkind, and thought myself better than people.
I mean, yeah. I mean, it hurts to realize that you I mean, even though it was just like my little class, my little elementary school or middle school class or whatever, sixth grade, I think it was. It hurt me too. It hurt me to know that I hurt her. Like because I didn't. That's not what I wanted. Like it wasn't my intention. Um, and so, but did I? I feel like the difference is like you and me, right? We did not absolve ourselves of any responsibility. Like we accepted the responsibility for our actions. I accepted the way that made her feel. You accept the way you made other people feel throughout the course of your time in ignorance. And you have to, right? Because that's you. And yeah. Do we all do things that we regret, that we wish that we hadn't done? Yeah, that's like being human. That's being a human being.
Yeah.
So there is this aspect of shared humanity in our flaws, right? That has always existed out there, that people have always talked about. But like it applies to this context as well. And I feel like people separate this context sometimes. And we
Right.
got to stop. We got to realize that like, no, like in fact, it's even more relevant in this context where there's this whole apparatus, designed to make sure that you never figure anything out.
Yeah.
So I definitely think that grace is definitely needed. That I mean, I teach math, guys. Like I teach math. All right. Can I just explain? Can I even begin to explain to you the frustration involved? in watching people make the same mistakes over and over and over
Yeah.
and over, knowing why they're making the mistake, explaining that to them time again, having them repeat it back to you, explain, and then just do it again, until finally something clicks. Sometimes it's
Yeah.
something so, far removed from what you were even talking about, but it makes sense to them. And that's what matters, is that, it shone a light on something for them.
Yeah.
And then boom, that light bulb goes on, and it's like a whole new them. And that is a process that we all go through all the time in all different contexts.
Yeah.
And I really wish we could learn to look on it more favorably. In the lessons
Yeah.
that I teach my students, I also teach about their mindset and, self advocacy, and creating a mindset of responsibility and accountability for yourself. And the more people we get, then the stronger the movement becomes. And then, there's going to be the inevitable backlash. And
Yeah.
then we'll see what happens, as a result of that, whether people will hold steadfast or whether they'll crumble, and then we'll
Yeah.
just keep repeating over and over and over again into perpetuity.
Exactly.
Well, I'm just glad that you're on my side, because seriously, I'm glad that you had your moment, in that you came to your moment anyway, and that you are actively and intentionally participating in people's growth and transformation in this context. I'm grateful for you. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
No problem. And I'm also really grateful for you taking this time out. I asked for 2 hours of your time, and you were like, "I'll do it." So, so I appreciate that so much. And you've given me a lot to think about as well. Like, this is a nuance in terms of thinking that I have never talked to a racialized Black person who had the experience that you had, and
Yeah.
has been open to talk about it like this. So, I mean, the value that you've just brought, hopefully, it reverberates through the generations. And
I hope so.
yeah, and I just want to say also that I'm proud of you for doing this, for making yourself vulnerable, for acknowledging your past mistakes, for living a new future by coming on this show and giving your testimony. So, well
Thank
done.
you.
You're welcome.